Welcome back to Troubled, a podcast by survivors of institutional abuse for survivors and the general public. We have not returned to our regularly scheduled broadcasting because there's still not been justice for Cornelius Frederick. And obviously, if any of you have been hanging out in the rabbit hole of Survivorland for any amount of time, you know that these are all marathons. There's no sprints in attempting to get justice out of an entirely corrupt system that is working exactly as it should, very deliberately mass legally abducting, detaining, abusing, torturing, and killing children in residential programs for youth since the assimilation of the indigenous, which still continues to this day. And now we have literal, practically, at least effectively, created gas chambers in our detainment camps in the United States of America. So well done, us. Well done. This will be an uphill battle. But to that effect, this is going to be another program devoted entirely to attempting to educate the mass public about the situation with Cornelius Frederick in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So this is Miranda with Troubled. My birthday is April 29th. That's when I was able to walk from my program. And unfortunately this year on my birthday, a 16-year-old foster boy who'd been in residential programs for 4 years after the death of his mother, which he witnessed, and his stepfather going into prison, was murdered in a 25-minute restraint for throwing a sandwich. Up to 7 adult staff members, only 2 of which combined weighed over 800 pounds, were on top of this 16-year-old boy simultaneously at one time. Over 10 people were involved, 10 people were fired, 3 people have been charged. One of the individuals who was party to this homicidal rage put his entire body weight, sat on Cornelius's chest for over 10 minutes. And so this, everybody who's jumping on now, you guys, the transcription for the video is out. Michigan finalized, it took 2 months. They finalized their entire report. So there really isn't any room for, what really happened. The only thing that there's really room for is what was really said, because I don't believe there was audio on the video. So all of these people going around talking about how he said, "I can't breathe," and using that as the headline, it's probable that he did, because he could not breathe. But let's go deeper than the headlines, because we've been having a lot of fights people over that, and so that's why we're doing these episodes. So our next guest, this person coming on with us now, almost gendered, but I guess his voice may do that. Oops, did it. Ex-staffer. So this person used to work at Lakeside, did know Cornelius personally, and after his murder has reached out to the community. They are stepping forward. There's a lot in this podcast that should be an obvious trigger warning. We will be discussing abuse of minors and the death of a child. So just be forewarned, but I, for one, genuinely and sincerely appreciate this individual coming forward and sharing this information. A lot of what they say is in direct contradiction to Lakeside and Sequel's public statements. And for the record, this isn't just, take this guy's word for everything, although kind of trust the dude's integrity at this point. But we literally sorted through dozens of evidentiary support, screenshots of text messages, screenshots of group chains and chats, and so there's a lot, and we will make sure that the attorneys for Cornelius Frederick's Trust have full access to this, because you can listen and check it out. But pretty sure that involuntary manslaughter is a joke. Not like we weren't already freaking having a good chuckle over the sadistic irony of it prior. But we have genuine evidence that we're going to discuss in the next few minutes that confirm that. So thank you for tuning in. Please make sure that you're advocating publicly for children in residential programs who are being abused, trafficked, and murdered all around you. And please speak up for survivors like myself, because it's time to end institutional abuse of minors in the United States of America. This isn't some sort of Boy Scout badge, pun intended, that we're supposed to get when we're abusing kids, and some of us are just fucking sick of it. So enough is enough. Let's do this. Justice for Cornelius. Thank you so much for coming forward with this. I know that this puts you in a pretty precarious position, so if you don't mind my asking, as an ex-employee of Lakeside who knew Cornelius Frederick directly, why did you decide to come forward and speak about this?
Because it's not about me, first off. And second, I mean, I tried to speak up before. I mean, I told everyone that I could think to tell that things were not okay at Lakeside. I mean, Lakeside knew, Sequel knew, the state knew. Um, yeah,
So everybody knows, is what you're telling us.
yeah, everybody knew.
Okay, so let's just get right into it then. So
I
how
mean,
did you,
either they knew or they were willfully ignorant. It's one of the two.
right? Well, in order for them to be deliberately and willfully ignorant, they have to be aware that there's something they don't want to be aware of, right? So I find that complicit
Exactly.
enough.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so how did you even find out about this job? Why did you get into, because what do we call this? How is this pitched to you? Is this like youth therapy, residential therapy?
So the official title is called youth counselor. That's the direct contact entry level position at Lakeside that I was hired as. I had taught at the middle school and high school level in a different state before this, and I taught at a private school. I really enjoyed it, but I didn't feel like those kids needed anything, and I wanted to do more. And so um, when we moved, that was what I had in mind. And I just got online and started looking around, and I think Indeed.com was the one that I found Lakeside on. I found their website. I emailed their HR, and they had a super high turnover rate, which I found out later, but the hiring process was very quick.
Okay. Was there any kind of training for the entry level position that was required of you going into this?
There was. It was when I started, I think that I was the first group that they had extended the training duration for, and they had extended it to 3 weeks before you were assigned to a dorm. After the first week, which was mostly spent learning, I feel like it was the first week. Like we as soon as we got into it, we were learning restraints already, and that was what a lot of the training focused on. I feel like on paper there were some other good materials, but the restraints were absolutely the focal point of that training. And they made sure that you knew on day one that it was a necessary component of the job duties. And I think by week 2, it may have been the end of week 1 that we were already shadowing. We ended up leaving early a lot of days during training. The one person who trained us seemed burnt out. He didn't seem burnt out. He was burned out. He told us that himself, and he told us the toll that this job takes on your mental health, and he didn't inspire a ton of confidence.
So what did you think though?
Training.
Yeah, but so you're coming in, this is like literally training. This is where they're setting the expectations of the work culture. So if this person's telling you they're burnt out and that this is draining or damaging someone's mental health, like, did you think he'd just been in it for too long, that you were bringing like a fresh attitude? Did you, like, were you concerned, or were you just like, oh, this guy, maybe he's just had a long run, he's just bitter?
Well, I mean, I was concerned. That was a red flag immediately, but
Yeah.
they qualify all of those statements with, but it's a really noble position and it's really important to do this type of work. And for him personally, I mean, I saw him rolling up to campus every day in what looks like a brand new, really expensive car. I mean, he was making money, so I don't think that, I mean, I think he prioritized that over his own mental health. And that was the dude that trained us. So I didn't realize this all immediately off the bat, but it didn't take me very long to realize that something was pretty off. And it was just one thing after another after I started paying attention. And I didn't last long. I mean, the writing was on the wall from the beginning.
Yeah. And this person who trained you, who did they work for? Were they a Lakeside employee? Were they from the state? Were they from Sequel? Do you know?
My understanding was that the guy who trained us was a sequel employee because he also went to other locations and did training at places other than just Lakeside. So I assumed that he would have to be a sequel employee. Otherwise, he would only be working at Lakeside. And he told us specifically during training that he had worked in a lot of other different locations prior to this one.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I bet he did. And I bet he did after. Did you have contact with Lakeside? You were employed by Lakeside, not Sequel. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Even though, Sequel owns Lakeside, so one and the same,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're already talking about red flags and training. So was there, I know that there had been some talk about CPR training. Were you guys all CPR certified? Especially if you're being trained to do restraints?
No, they tried to do CPR training, I think, like for me, it was about a month and I don't want to say specific time durations, but it was a substantial amount of time had passed since I had been assigned to a dorm when they told all of the entry level staff that we had to get CPR certified. And the day that I showed up to the administration building to complete that CPR training, I was the only one that showed up, and they decided to reschedule because they didn't want to complete a whole training for one person. And while I worked there, I never received CPR certification.
Okay, so I would imagine the reason they're having you guys go to CPR training is because you're required by the state to have CPR certification. It doesn't sound like this is some sort of voluntary weekend, like team, like motivating exercise.
No, it was not prioritized by Lakeside staff or Sequel staff.
Okay. Did you guys receive any outside training other than, the rescheduled never happened CPR certification?
There were weekly, I guess you could call it training. I don't know. It was often kind of gossipy and didn't accomplish much, but there were weekly trainings conducted by the GLs and the directors of each dorm. But that was always about restraints or whether or not the kids were going positive or negative for the week. There wasn't much else to it. And, sometimes people showed up, sometimes people didn't. If I'm being honest, one of the next big red flags that I noticed was that as soon as people would get promoted from youth counselor to GL or I forget the specific abbreviation for the next title, but the position above GLs, the ones that are in charge of supervision for the dorm, of which there are 6 dorms, they were never around. They were on set as soon as they got promoted and put on salary, they could make their own schedules, and that's what they did.
So are they staying on site at this residential program?
It's not. It's only residential for the kids, I believe. I don't think any staff reside on campus. And they have overnight staff specifically to account for that discrepancy.
Okay. And so question about your coworkers. It doesn't sound like they're necessarily trying to recruit the best and the brightest. And I don't mean that about you, obviously. I'm sure anybody listening will figure that out pretty quickly.
No worries.
Did you notice a specific type of person they were recruiting? Are they recruiting like people who are just getting out of high school, or these like all kind of entry level people or criminal pasts? What do you think?
So I can only speak to what I saw for the youth counselor requirements, but they would take anyone that had I don't even know if they did background checks. I think they just did fingerprinting and it was anyone who had a pulse and would start for $13.25 an hour. I say that it was $13 an hour, I think. And then if you had a degree, they'd start you at $13.25 an hour. And they made sure that you knew that there was plenty of opportunity for overtime and you can make time and a half. That was pretty much their criteria. Turnover was so high. I did not work there very long at all. And by the time that I left, I was one of the veteran staff on the dorm that I was assigned to.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, so you had brought forth some really interesting communications between you and your coworkers, which I think really testify to the work culture that you're like talking about. So do you want to talk about that? So what is this work culture? Because I saw some really concerning things that I'll ask you questions about, but I don't know if you'd like to
Sure.
start this off.
Sure. I mean, yeah, it was very us versus them, and there were multiple group dynamics that applied to. It was all of the kids versus all of the staff, but it was more complex than that. It was the kids versus the youth counselors, because the youth counselors were the ones with them every single day. And obviously, when you're with someone every day, that creates potential for conflict. But it's also, it was the kids against everyone. That's what it boils down to, was that the kids were not, they didn't have solidarity from the adults that were supposed to be taking care of them. The adults that stayed, a very few amount of them, in my opinion, did it because they actually liked helping kids. I would say that most of them were not there to make a difference. Most of them were there to make a paycheck. And the kids knew that. I mean, the kids didn't even bother asking if you were going to stick around for like the first month or so, because they knew the us versus them dynamic absolutely applied to youth counselors versus our supervisors, because we knew that they didn't have our back either. And we knew that push comes shove, maybe they'd show up for the shift, or maybe we were on our own. And we absolutely knew that it was administration versus direct care staff too, because they were always in the office. The only time we saw them was when something was being purchased and put into one of the dorms, like furniture, or if something was wrong. Other than that, they weren't there. And I think that, they had access to the cameras that were in the dorms, and a lot of them would hang out in their office a lot and say that that's what they were doing, but there was no way to verify that. And they were your boss and your boss's boss. So it was a tough position to be in.
Yeah. Well, per the cameras, I saw you go to one of your bosses. Let's talk about that.
I'm not sure which situation you're talking about, unfortunately, because there were many of them.
Okay, so let's start with the off-camera situation where you witnessed one of your coworkers restrain someone inappropriately, and you felt like it was deliberately off camera, so you reported it to your supervisor. How'd that go?
First of all, I have to say which time, because I
saw. Oh my God.
I personally saw and reported multiple instances of students being restrained off camera. And in fact, I didn't see this personally, but I did hear about and report instances where the staff members, they were just fed up with some of the behaviors that some of the more volatile kids were exhibiting, and they just would tell the kids, look, either get your shit together or we're going to do this off camera and move forward after that. The choice is yours. So that's the sort of environment. And the kids knew that. They knew that there were staff members there that would do them dirty if they stepped out of line in a location where there weren't cameras. There were multiple instances, and that's why I say Lakeside knew, Sequel knew, and the state knew too, because reports were made to CPS by a lot of staff members that were working there. And that's, again, like what a position to be in when no one will listen. And I can't imagine, because it made me so frustrated and hopeless. I can't imagine the way that made these kids feel, because I was an adult. I had an education and the ability to navigate the things that were occurring around me. They didn't. And they had baggage and they had trauma. And there are no words. One specific instance that's really important to bring to light is one in which I saw a kid. It was not a restraint. It was not in compliance with what we were taught in regards to performing restraints. I saw a dorm director pick a kid up by his neck outside of the cafeteria. There were tons of people around. The kids were around. It made me so uncomfortable because the kid that was being picked up by his neck was laughing like he knew that it was supposed to be a joke, or I don't know. I mean, maybe it was just one of those situations where it makes no sense, and the only thing that you can do is laugh because it's so nonsensical, and I mean, I can't imagine what was going through his mind. He must have just thought that it couldn't be real life that was happening to him. And I reported it. I specifically messaged immediately after the person that trained me, who was a sequel employee, and the response that I got back was that I should give that person who picked that kid up by his neck off camera, I should give this person feedback. Now, feedback means, fuck if I know, constructive criticism, I assume. How do you give constructive criticism to your boss's boss that doesn't even work on the same dorm as you when they pick up a kid by their neck off camera and tell them, I don't even remember what he said. I was so taken aback. So again, Lakeside knew, Sequel knew, and the state knew, because plenty of reports were made and no one did a goddamn thing.
Yeah, I'm looking at that text message and he's like, copy. So have you gotten with him and given him feedback for that? That's why I was forwarding feedback to you as our supervisor.
Right.
Yeah.
And keep in mind that person was not just a supervisor. The person that I texted was the person that trained me, the one that was supposed to be ensuring compliance, because he was the one who was teaching us how to be compliant.
Right. And he is the one that sounds like we're assuming, because it was just like, that's the way it was presented, that he works for Sequel. He's the Sequel trainer in the area. And so to just double, I haven't asked you this before, so I'm hoping you say one thing, but did you, because you thought you were already reporting this to Sequel, did you go above and beyond? Did you go report this on Sequel's like anonymous little website thing that they have set up?
They didn't set that up until after I was no longer. I think they set that up like a few weeks. I don't want to give time durations because I honestly,
right.
I
No,
don't
please.
want to be able to place when I worked there, but I remember the meeting that they called to set that up. They had all of the staff come to the cafeteria, and Kelly Stone, the former executive director of Lakeside, who, by the way, she knew fucking everything. She should not be fired. She should be prosecuted as well. Because this is the thing. This is what keeps happening. They keep blaming all of the direct care staff for doing these things, which is appropriate, but then they let the people who are training and hiring and employing and paying these people off the hook. And what that does is, number one, it teaches those people really fast that they can get away with a lot, and it perpetuates the cycle of abuse, because you know that those people are just going to get hired somewhere else and do the exact same thing.
Yeah. 100%. And if those people, because obviously this isn't the first situation Kelly's been involved in that resulted in injury or potentially a death. So I think that what we're looking at is this toxic culture goes all the way to the top, and it creates, like we talked about earlier, a safe space for child predators in whatever, flavor they want to play out this, victimhood.
Sure. Yeah.
So I saw an interesting text that I wanted to ask you about. It's pictures of a boy with a swollen nose being sent around in these group texts that you guys shared. And they're referring to him as what, Jeffrey Dahmer's son and a future serial killer. What's that even about in the first place? Why are we sending is he injured? And what is that about? Like, do they often talk about the kids like this?
Oh God. So I remember who you're talking to, and he had just had like an infection on his nose or something. I think that there was some discussion between some of the staff about his mental state. I mean, he wasn't doing well, and they always used to. I mean, with this specific individual, it was not a constant thing, but they did make jokes about him having like these lifeless eyes, or like he's got to be a serial killer because look at his eyes, stuff like that. And I specifically screenshotted and saved those because the people that were laughing were the people that were supposed to be. I mean, they were the people in charge. The group chat that was created for the staff members working on my dorm, which was Heliostorm. It was one of the two neglect and abuse storms. It's where Cornelius was. There was a group chat created for all of those staff, and the director of the dorm named that group chat Death Row Academy. I screenshotted that too. And it's hard to remember. I felt like I was reporting things constantly, and it's hard to remember if anything was actually acted upon because there was just so much stuff. And that was the culture of that dorm. The group chat was Death Row Academy. They were making fun of the kids in the group chat. I don't know. Again, I don't understand the fact that I have encountered so many adults who should be well-adjusted, who should be kind, who should be compassionate, empathetic, morally minded. I don't understand how I have seen so many of the adults that should be those things that are working in this industry they don't care about kids. Why would you work in this industry if you don't care about kids? And I think the only answer to that is either for the money or because you're there to perpetuate a cycle of abuse, because you've got baggage in your past. I mean, I think a lot of people maybe start thinking that they want to do a good thing. They want to do a humanitarian thing. They want to work with kids. They want to influence the next generation. Those people, I did not find many people like that stayed like that working at Lakeside.
So does this corrupt even the people who come in with the right motivation and the right intentions?
No, it roots them out. You can't have those and stay working there. I mean, yeah. I say that other than, and administration used this against us too. And they used the kids in this way too, because they knew that the staff that stuck around care deeply about the kids, because that's the impossible decision that staff that stuck around were faced with. If you leave the kids, if you go try to find other work, if you do a different job, the kids are still there. And maybe you'll be okay, but they won't. They're going to have to deal with the same inconsistency by incredibly high staff turnover, by improperly trained staff, by staff who were not held accountable. And it's heartbreaking. And eventually that's the decision that I had to make, because in the short time that I worked there, I had to go to the emergency room on multiple occasions because I was assaulted by some of the kids. And it got to the point where my spouse, where it was obvious that I wasn't safe. And my spouse said, we've got to look for something else because I understand what the kids are dealing with, but our family, we got to take care of our family too, because if we can't make it, then we can't do good in the future if we don't take care of ourselves. I mean, if you don't equip yourself and you don't take care of yourself, it's just so hard to know where that line of self-sacrifice and moral obligation is. And I think that looks different for a lot of people. But for me, by the time that I left, there were already rumors around that Lakeside was being investigated. And my hope was that I didn't know for sure. I took a chance, and my hope was that the investigation would produce something, some sort of accountability, some sort of structure, some sort of fucking anything. And we found another job in the same industry working with at-risk kids, as opposed to some of the demographic that is common at Lakeside, because some of those kids have real trauma. I mean, some of the things that those kids have experienced are unspeakable. Some of the things that happens to Cornelius were unspeakable before the ultimate unspeakable thing that happens to Cornelius.
Well, this is genuine trauma. These are incredible issues that you guys are dealing with and that these kids are dealing with. And I think ultimately what it comes down to is they can call it a therapeutic environment all they want, but it doesn't sound like anything that's going on is beneficial for children who need the kind of help these kids need.
No, for it to be therapeutic, it would have to be rehabilitative, and it's not rehabilitative, it's punitive. That's the way everything is structured. The kids every single week would have their names written up on a whiteboard, and there would be either a plus for positive or a minus for negative, or I think some of them went neutral some weeks, but it was punitive every week, and they would decide based on collective conversation which kids should be positive for the week and which kids should be. And the positive kids got extra privileges, and the negative kids, they just had to have felt even more disenfranchised.
Yeah, you're punishing. See, and like you're a parent, I'm a parent. So there's a difference between responding to a kid with constructive conversation and therapy and all of the things that can come into that, and then just strictly beating their ass and putting them in the corner and taking away their dessert or grounding them, you know.
Right. That's the sort of parenting that's done by the same sort of people that talk about children the way that they talk about their pets. I mean, pain stimulus is not healthy for child development. It's not.
Per some of what you're talking about with the whole staff versus the kid stuff, I kind of want to dig into this power dynamic and bring it centered around Cornelius for a minute. So there is a text communication that you shared with us between you and a coworker. And it's something that I think is going to become a major part of this case. And, for anyone listening, everyone's connecting with the lawyers tomorrow to make sure that they have all this jazz. But so what he says, I got in front of me, he said, "Good job, by the way, tonight. I can tell you're getting used to things and learning how to deal with situations better. I don't trying to be no ass or none at all or anything. But sometimes if you feel like I don't be engaging with you in some situations, sometimes I just trying to see how you're going to handle it on your own. I wouldn't let you be in danger though. Like that shit with Corn earlier. Next time in that situation, we would fuck him up pounds, but keep it up." Okay, firstly, I don't care about the situation with Corn earlier, but what does fuck him up pounds mean, or what did you take that to mean?
I don't know, because I had never seen. I mean, Cornelius was a big guy. I mean, Cornelius is not someone that you fuck up. I mean, when I was working there, I think he was 16 years old, and I mean, I've competed in collegiate athletics. I'm a relatively in shape person. Cornelius could bench 3 of me. He was incredibly strong. So I think that for that reason alone, I wasn't really worried about anything that was going to do. Gordon was not a kid that you picked on, but I don't know. I should have, I haven't looked at that message in a long time, and rereading it, I wish that I had, I don't know, because at that point I had done everything that I could think to do. I had told everyone that I could think to tell about what was happening. And that specific shift, that specific situation, to give you a little bit of context. Number one, the guy who sent that to me, I personally had never seen him do anything inappropriate, or anything that was not in compliance with the regulations that I knew that we were accountable for. And I should have, I should have known better. I say I should have known better. I don't know how I would have known better, but
yeah, stop focusing it around you. I'm worried that there's a huge part of you that feels like you let these kids down, or that you're putting some of the blame for something that happened when you didn't even work there on yourself. And I just want to be very fucking clear. Like, that's not okay. Like, you coming out publicly, and what this text message could potentially mean for the motivation and the difference between manslaughter and murder charges. This is really important. And as a survivor myself, and watching the surreal dystopia fall around me as a 17-year-old, and thinking that none of the staffs and none of the adults in the world actually even cared. And now as an adult, to be having someone like you come forward, and I know what you're going to be risking as you come public with this stuff. So this means a lot. And so, instead, maybe use that as motivation for this. Stop beating yourself up over it.
I appreciate that. I don't know. Everything that you're saying is right, and what you're saying is true, but I don't, there's always going to be a part of me that feels something hopeless about the situation. And you're right. I don't know. It's an impossible situation. What do you do when the people that are supposed to be taking care of the kids are the people that are allowing them to be hurt? What do you do? We're having a civil rights movement right now that's asking that exact same question. And I don't fucking know. I should have started marching back then. I don't know. You're right, though. It's not about me. That night, the reason that Galloway sent that message was because I was working a second shift. The kids usually went to bed around, I think it was like 9 or 9:30. You could go to bed a little later depending on whether or not you were positive or negative for that week. But Corn was having a really hard time that night specifically because he had trauma associated with, can I just say what I know happens to him? You can edit it out, I guess. If not, Cornelius watched his mother die right in front of him when he was a little boy, and it happened at night. And Cornelius really did not like going to bed and having to turn the lights off. And I don't fucking blame him. And that night, it was after lights out. Cornelius did not want to go to bed. And there was not anybody that was about to make him against his will, because like I said, he was so fucking strong, and he was so physically powerful. And I was the one that was closest. He was out in the bay. It's the main area. His room was down the hall. And I think Gay was just kind of watching me because I was the closest, and he was just going to see what I did because I was a relatively new staff. And I think that Cornelius knew. One thing that I said every single day was, I am not about trying to put my hands on any of you. Like, I do not want to restrain anybody. That is not why I'm here. And I told that to him that night because it was my job to make sure that he was in his room, because that's regulation, that's compliance. After lights out, it's a safety requirement, yada, yada, yada. He did not want to go. and there was no one else there to make sure that he was in compliance, and therefore to make sure that our dorm was in compliance that was going to do anything. I'm pretty sure it was like me and the one other person. Maybe there was another person, but I don't know. Usually it was like 3 people on the dorm for second shift, putting them to bed at night. And Cornelius squared up, and he was angry, and I looked at him and I put my hand on my radio and I said, "Look, dude, I can't imagine being you and being told you have to go to bed at a certain time every night to begin with, but you know the position that you're in and you know the position that I'm in, and I don't want to put my hands on you. I don't want to restrain you." And I asked him to go to his room, and I asked him if there's anything that I could do to make it easier on him. And he asked for a snack, and I gave him a snack, and he went to his bed and he ate his snack and he went to sleep. And I think that that's what he said about, you know, I don't even remember what he said. He said something nice at the beginning of the message, and I think that that's what it was about. But
yeah, he said you handled it really well. He wanted to see how you'd handle it, and you handled it 100%.
Right.
Which you did. And so this leads me, so if you can verbally communicate with this giant truck of a young man.
That's the fucking thing. He never should have been in a position where de-escalation wasn't an option. If I hadn't been there that long, I didn't know him, I didn't have a personal relationship with him, he didn't know me from anybody else. And if he listens to me, why would he not listen to other people about a fucking sandwich? I guarantee you there was an opportunity at some point in between him throwing that sandwich and him being murdered that de-escalation was an option, and the staff that were there did not choose that.
Well, I have 2 questions about the de-escalation. So number 1, is it true? I mean, according to Michigan, but I want to ask you, were you aware of procedures in place for Cornelius to not lay hands on him because of his previous abuse being a trigger? I
have absolutely no knowledge of that requirement for him. I have never heard that ever.
So when you were responsible for potentially restraint, so no one ever informed you guys that, hey, we need to make sure we try to de-escalate Corn. Let's not use restraints because of his past abuse and the trauma.
No, I never heard that from any staff members ever. And I mean, direct care, supervisors, anyone ever. And in fact, I mean, I saw Cornelius get restrained occasions. I mean, I apologize. I'm just not sure where that question is coming from, because if that was a requirement and I should have been made aware of that, how unspeakably angry should I feel right now? I don't.
I'm sorry.
I don't know.
I'm sorry. Lakeside reported to the state of Michigan. It's in the report that was released that Cornelius had specialized procedures in place because of his past trauma, that he was not to be touched. I don't know what the extent of that, right? I don't know if I'm assuming there's a line where obviously we're going to touch him, but they, and I'll look into exactly what they'd written out to the state of Michigan, but they even reported on that on the local news, that allegedly there were procedures in place that he wasn't to be touched or restrained because it would have been a problem. So the fact that wasn't, how could there be a procedure in place if the people responsible for carrying out that procedure were never informed?
Yeah, I wish I had known.
Well, you weren't the one who sat on him for 10 minutes. So, but per that, the 3 staff members who were being charged with involuntary manslaughter, for me, I asked what you thought about that shit with Corn earlier. Next time in that situation, we would fuck him up, LBS for pounds, but keep it up. So to me, what that looked like, and people can come at me for my assumption, but I've never heard anyone say fuck him up with pounds. So what I think that, like what I assumed immediately, but also I know how this played out, so it's a little bit of a cheat, is that we're talking about...
Well, I can tell, actually, now I can tell you exactly what it meant. It didn't occur to me when I first received the message, but I mean, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. I guarantee you that meant that if he got out of line again, that the insinuation would be take him off camera and physically restrain him until he did whatever you were telling him to do.
Yeah, and
I saw that, and I saw that with other kids, and I reported that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking at here. And so, like, then another question about the staff versus kids power shift in play that's going on here. Were there people with Corn specifically, or with other kids that had specific kids they targeted, that they were harsher with? Anyone that had issues with him? Could this have been, because this comment right here that was made in August 2019, months before he was killed by being fucked up with pounds on camera, this time not off camera, like, it feels very much like it's part of this toxic work culture, and it's a premeditated thing that we're going to use our weight to restrain Cornelius, but not just nicely. It's not saying we're going to keep him safe with our weight. It's saying we're going to fuck him up pounds. Like, that seems like a very premeditated kind of focused on this specific Is there any of that going on with him specifically, or other kids with the staff?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's as much as I want to say.
Okay. No, that's fair. So that's why when we talked about this specific message out of all of them, I mean, it really solidifies that work culture that you're talking about in this power play. And it's very concerning because of the way this is being perceived now.
Yeah, I mean, the work environment was chaos. And bad things happen when structure is not in place in a child care setting. I mean,
yeah. No, I totally agree. Per you seeing Cornelius in restraints prior to this situation, how often, would you consider it frequent, or was it just kind of a random situation for him specifically to be put in restraints?
I didn't see him get restrained very often. I know that he got into some fights, and I know that he really didn't take shit from anybody, but I mean, I say that, now that I'm thinking about it, I wasn't there long. I should not have seen him get restrained as many times as I saw him get restrained. So it was irregular in that I don't think it was. I mean, I don't know.
Well, what's regular? So when I asked you, are you seeing someone?
It wasn't like, hey, let's sit down at 6 p.m. and restrain Cornelius. It was irregular in that way.
Well, in my school, there were certain kids that it was regular to see them restrained. Like, what I mean is, if we saw 5 dudes running across campus, I'm going to assume it's that kid. Also, it would be normal every few days, every couple days, for me to watch this kid get slammed down in the hallway, because and then what I mean by irregular is, a lot of my friends got restrained, but it was very situational and it only happened a few times. Whereas some of the other kids, maybe they were obstinate, maybe they were mouthy, maybe they made that angry face and squared up. And so they were just kind of like, it felt like staff kind of just took out their frustration on those specific kids.
I think that, it's hard to say, because Cornelius was generally incomparably a good kid. I mean, he wasn't in trouble all the time. He wasn't in trouble even personally, I don't think, that often. I mean, I asked Corn for help on multiple occasions when some of the younger kids wouldn't listen to me. I mean, he was a helpful guy.
So was he kind of a leader or a role model for the younger kids? Did they listen to him?
Yeah, he absolutely was. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, there's something that, if you don't mind, please. I don't know if this needs to be edited out, but because it's probably inside information that was part of the sequel training that I don't know. I don't know whether or not they're going to sue me and take the $0 that I have for them because I'm saying this, but it doesn't matter at this point anyway, I guess. So part of the training that they used was called, it was this thing called And they would use this diamond in order to categorize kids on the dorm and identify them based on group dynamics. So, for example, Corn was an upper half kid. He was smart, he was independent, he was strong. The younger kids and the kids that were a little bit lower functioning generally listened when he talked. I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah, well, it sounds like, per your comment, that you guys were using him as a local mediary and leader, like that liaison, because he could be reasoned with, he could be communicated with, he was an intelligent, empathetic person, and so that's more of a reason why I just don't understand why he was the one that wound up under this human dog pile of over 2,000 pounds. Like, I just, especially, I understand that he was big, I understand that he didn't take shit, I get that. But if he's someone who's able to be intellectually reasoned with and utilized as an ambassador, then I don't understand why over a sandwich de-escalation just wasn't an option.
Yeah, I don't understand either. I don't understand. I don't know what could have changed in between the time that I left employment there and the time that he was murdered that would have changed him that substantially. And that was one thing that he didn't change. He knew who he was.
I think that might have been the problem. In this one text communication with you and your coworker, he's saying, like, I'm glad you're getting used to the work culture, which obviously in this text is really about being harsh with the kids or being, authoritative, if you will. And saying, for the most part, 100%, but, next time we would fuck him up. And this is in August, right? So it's like almost, this is 5 months before the situation. And he's not talking about a random person. He's talking about Corn specifically. So even though at this time when you know him, Corn is still this ambassador, this upper level of this diamond community, he's still talking about fucking him up with their weight 5 months beforehand. So I'm not sure anything changed. I think you're totally right. I think Corn was exactly the same. I think that, whether it was personal gunning or not, he was still, human collateral for a punching bag with weight.
That's accurate.
To wrap up the Cornelius stuff, do you have anything you want to say about him as a person? Because I know that something that's been bothering a lot of us is the local news and the social media are like, he was a kid with behavioral issues, he had problems, they're assuming that he was violent or started problems like this, and that he's just another statistic of this, bad kid who got sent to a bad kid school and wound up where they sometimes wind up. And for someone who knew him personally, I think it'd be really good to get a little bit of a firsthand, a little bit, more than what you've already attested to his character.
I think that anyone who would blame Cornelius for what happened to Cornelius, I hope that they suffer immeasurably. Cornelius did the best he could with the situation that he was put in. I think that there's another power dynamic that exists between. I think that there's a comparison to be made between the way that adults treat kids coming from these environments and the way that they treat normal teenagers with normal baggage. Cornelius was a teenage boy. I do not know many teenage boys that don't experience anger. I don't know many teenage boys that are not moody. I don't know many teenage boys who get through their teenage years without making mistakes. In my mind, Cornelius Frederick, in my mind, Corn was a teenage boy. That's just what he was. He was a good person who did the best with the situation that he was put in. I saw Cornelius put up weight in the gym that I will never be able to lift, and then turn around and show compassion and kindness to kids who were younger than him and to kids that were struggling when he wasn't. I think that Cornelius is a perfect representation of the complexity of normal humans. I mean, he was special, but he wasn't abnormal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what's horrifying is that all the people that I've had contact with that knew him personally also describe him as special, incredibly intelligent, empathetic, sympathetic, someone who was broken so widely open by the tragedy of this world that he could become a human bridge for other people that he saw that in. And I think that the potential for someone that special that kept, that softness within them, even though everything was deliberately stacked up against him, to lose someone like that and the impact that they would have on others and our society, I think is even a greater tragedy. And when you speak about our society treating these children differently and kind of considering them an abnormal, broken, whatever, that just kind of gets tossed away, maybe recycled, never rehabilitated. I think that's ultimately the biggest sickness that we've got going on here, because so many of these incredibly talented and amazingly special human beings never gifted their gifts on the world. And in this situation, this wasn't because he gave up. It wasn't because, addiction grabbed a hold of him and 15 years later, he doesn't even have any of those opportunities. And so when you say that Cornelius was murdered, that's exactly what happened. This was a murder, and this is a crime against all of our communities. And so, whatever we have to do to make sure that these narratives are unwound and reviewed on the larger scale so people really understand what we're dealing with here and how it impacts society at large, and it's imperative. And we've spoken, there's absolutely no way, and the end of this episode will be all the ways you can help, but there's zero way to get justice or make this right for Cornelius. That's not an option. But if he becomes the name, if Cornelius Frederick is the name of the last child murdered in these programs and the laws that prevent this kind of tragedy in the future or protect his own siblings who are currently in these institutions under the care of the state of Michigan, which they are suing currently for the murder of their brother, then that's the best we can do. And it's shitty. We don't have any good options here. None of this is going to be cute or fun. There's no heroes here. This is all going to suck. But whatever little bit we can do to memorialize him appropriately and to let him have that impact on the world that was stolen from him, we got to do that.
Yeah, he deserves that. I'm sorry. How dare we continue to live in a society, in a country that doesn't do right by people like Cornelius? How dare we continue to live in a society where injustices like these are not rectified permanently?
Well, we're not going to dare to do that. We're going to dare to shout the truth from every mountaintop until this is resolved. And if it takes the rest of our lives for some of us, I mean, it's the reason, for me at least, this is how I make sense of what happened to me personally, is that the reason I was put in that situation was to do this now.
I think that that's incredible. I'm so grateful. I think you're right on. I mean, we can be sad, we can be angry, but at some point we've got to fucking get busy, and we've got to make sure that this never happens again.
Never. And we're coming for a sequel. I think we both 100% agree that 3 charges on 10 individuals that were fired, and excluding any Lakeside or sequel management or supervisors or board members, is not even close to justice.
No, it's not. And that's what we're going for.
Yeah, all the way, baby. All right. So this is Amanda Householder. She's the daughter of, I'm sure you haven't gotten into this because you have enough on your mind, but her father owns Circle of Hope Girls Ranch in Missouri through the IFB Baptist, group, and the Lester Roloff. So she's been working pretty hard on exposing her own dad and getting that shut down. So here's her first question for you.
I was wondering what the protocols were for restraining, because I heard somewhere that Cornelius had a completely different plan for Cornelius, and that he wasn't even supposed to be restrained. I was also wondering if it was normal for that many people to be on top of one child at a time. And did they ever use peer-on-peer punishments? Like, were peers ever restraining the other peers?
Sure. So the procedure for restraints was, if you were ever in a situation in which youth or staff were in danger, or if a youth was potentially endangering themselves, you were required to initiate a physical restraint to ensure that neither of those occurred. There never should have been that many people on top of Cornelius. In fact, I specifically remember them telling us in a weekly meeting that we were no longer allowed to use a supine extension hold, which was part of our training, because it was I forget the reason. Either they had too many on file and they were being investigated for it, or it was no longer, I don't remember, but we were told not to use the supine extension, which was the Cpi Restraint, or I forget the specific acronym, but that was the specific restraint that required 3 people. I think it was, you had 1 staff member on each side, and then 1 staff member. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I believe that was 4 people, and that's probably why they outlawed it. It was 1 staff member on each side. After the child was in the prone position on the ground, and you had 1 person ensuring that they were not able to do anything violent with their head and injure their head. So you had 1 person up top, and then you had 1 person securing the legs. And so as far as I know, no one should have been using that restraint per administration's direction. And that was when I was still there. That wasn't even when this happened to Cornelius. So the only thing that makes sense is that he was just too strong, and they knew that the only way they were going to actually be able to restrain him is if they did a restraint, if they performed a restraint that they were not supposed to, and there were enough of them.
Well, the most people that you guys were taught to use in a restraint was 4 people. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because there were 7 on top of him physically at the same time, at most at a time, in the video. So even if they were using the 4-point that they were trained to do, there's no reason for there to be 7 people physically on top of him.
Yeah, it's pretty fucking damning. I haven't watched the video. I can't. I don't know if I'll ever be able to.
And it's not available. It's the transcript, but no, I don't think you should, man.
Okay.
Yeah, the transcript was absolutely horrible. And And according to the state of Michigan, he didn't fight back. That's the whole thing is pretty damning. Like there's nothing. But to her final point, did they, it doesn't sound like they did, but did they ever use the peers in any of these restraints or for, punishment for the children?
Not that I saw. No. I think
Okay,
the
good.
kids would joke around sometimes and pretend like they were putting each other in a restraint. I did see that, definitely, but I don't think that I personally witnessed any youth putting each other in physical restraints. But I mean, then again, I didn't work there that long, so I can't really say. I mean,
That's always your winning thing. I didn't stay there that long, so that's good. That's good. We love that. Okay. Amanda had another question for you as well.
I also was curious if the owners of Lakeside Academy, like the owners of the building or whatever, or the heads of the school, it could be like they don't own it, but like the people who are in charge of the school, do they live on the property or do they leave and then come, or are they even ever really there? I was also curious if they had any students that graduated from the program and became staff, or if they left and came back and became staff.
so I don't know about the last question, whether or not any students came back to work at Lakeside. I don't think that I was made aware of anyone who was in that position. The previous question about Lakeside owners, upper management, those folks being on campus, I don't believe there was anything residential for them, or I don't think any staff members on campus. And I rarely saw them. I think I saw Kelly Stone like an entirety of 3 times when I was there for very brief periods of time. I think I spoke to her once. That was the thing, was that upper management was largely absent most of the time. And what I was made to understand by other staff employed at my level was that that was the game. That's what happens when you make salary, you make your own schedule, you can come and go as you please.
But they were still fully aware of what was going on at the location when they weren't present.
Yeah, I mean, they were all, every time a kid ran truant, they were all in the same group chat and they all drove back to campus and went out looking for them. Yeah, absolutely. They knew what was going on. They chose not to be there. They chose to let the frontline staff handle the majority of the issues because they didn't want to deal with it.
Super cute.
Unless it affected their livelihoods or their professional status.
Well, this whole situation is about to affect their professional status as well as their livelihood. We'll make damn sure of that because it's about time we had this conversation. All right, next question.
Some of the staff at the troubled teen institution that I attended said that they stayed because they felt like they were potentially less abusive than other people that they might bring in the future. I'm wondering if that's similar for your situation, or if you didn't realize how serious the abuse was until it was too late in the case of Cornelius Frederick.
I mean, yeah, that's the exact situation that I was in, whether or not to stay, because I knew that if I stayed, I would be there for the kids that needed it. And I could make sure that at least I was there. And management knew that, and they knew when they had the good ones and the ones that were there to make a difference, and they used them up, just like everybody else. I don't know that I had the time or the tools to think about the future very much when I was working at Lakeside. I was an hourly employee, and every day at work, it was very difficult to think past the 8-hour shift, or if you were working a double, your 16 hours, because there was enough every single shift to occupy you completely, whether that was on a spiritual, emotional, or intellectual level. There was so much going on all the time with those kids that maybe I should have seen the signs. I don't know. I don't think that I had the ability to, given the circumstances, but somebody should have.
Well, you're here now, and that's what's important.
Yeah.
Why did it take the death of a child for staff members to come forward and talk about the abuse that was happening in this youth facility? This behavior happens in youth facilities all over the world and isn't even addressed. It's ignored because foster children are deemed as expendable. But now that a child's dead, these people want to come forward and talk. So I want to know what they did to help protect these children while they were in the facility as staff members.
Loaded question.
Yeah, that's a good question. For me personally, every time I saw something occur that was inappropriate or potentially damaging to any of the kids, I reported it. That's what I did. I don't know why it took the death of a child. I think maybe that's where our society is at on the moral scale, if that tells you anything about our society. And I think that that's egregious. And I don't know. I think that the people in charge, I think they know that if they pretend like they're listening to you for long enough, you'll either become hopeless enough to leave or complacent enough to stop talking to them and telling them what's going on and asking for their help. And I mean, they didn't care about the I say that. They did not care nearly enough about the welfare of the kids while they were alive. I see why they only started paying attention when somebody died.
Mic drop.
Hi, this is my question for the Lakeside staff, and I mean this completely sincerely. How do you guys sleep at night? Do you feel, even if you weren't physically present at work that day, do you feel guilty or ashamed or even a little bit culpable about what happened to Cornelius or any of the kids that you were supposed to be taking care of there?
Before you answer that, I just want to insert, because these questions are coming at the end of the episode, I think it's very safe to say that you're having trouble sleeping. And I also do want to, again, for the probably 17th time we've confirmed this, just to clarify that you were not working there and you were not in any way present, and you'd already left Lakeside for all of these reasons prior to this situation. But feel free to respond.
I think that that's an excellent question that everyone with any sort of responsibility at Lakeside should have to answer. And I think that people should have to answer it publicly. I'm not responsible for what happens to Cornelius, but that doesn't mean that I don't carry him with me. I don't sleep well. I hope that a lot of other people don't sleep well until he gets the justice that he deserves. I don't know, but I'm angry with you.
I think that's exactly where we all are. I think that we're all really angry, and this is personal. And I think that, just from me to you, I recognize how incredibly personal this is for you and the incredible weight. I wish that more people in your position had the conscience to weigh this against. I think you might be more of an exception than a rule.
Yeah, I didn't fit in very well at Lakeside. I think the problem is that I shouldn't be special. I shouldn't be different. I should be the minimum requirement. What I'm doing should be the minimum requirement for taking care of children. I mean, it never should have gotten to that place. And the fact that we keep saying over and fucking over that it never should have gotten to that place means we need to wake up and start learning some lessons and quit letting the people that refuse to learn the lessons, the people be ignorant, to keep living the way that they're living, to keep, I don't know, everybody wants to point fingers. It's time that we all start doing our part together collectively to make sure that it sticks.
Yeah.
And that this doesn't happen anymore.
And per the complicitness, whose responsibility in the situation of Cornelius Frederick, because he was a foster child, because it was taxpayer dollars that funded his abuse and ultimate murder, we are all complicit. Everyone in our communities, because this doesn't just happen in Michigan. This is happening where I am in Texas, everywhere. We're all complicit in this. So it is everyone's responsibility to get angry and stand up and speak up, because, I guess it's not anyone's problem until it's their kid. But if we could just, Cornelius should be our kid, our brother. He should be embraced this way by the community. And the only way we'll hit a critical mass of awareness and righteous rage required to make these kinds of transitions and transformations in our society.
You're right. I wish it would happen more quickly.
Yeah, I wish it happened a couple hundred years ago when they started doing this on a mass scale with the indigenous kids. But apparently that wasn't enough. And then the cult spawn tough love TTI that we're all in, that wasn't enough. And now we're doing, kids in cages, gas chambers on the border now. So I'm really not sure when enough is enough, but I've had enough.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have had enough. And I think that the idea that we live in a first world country where the rich eat the young is a really fucking good indicator that we need to stop paying attention to money like we do. We've got to treat profit differently. We have to change our values, regardless of religion, regardless of worldview, regardless. There are things that we can all agree on, and this is one of them. So let's wake the fuck up and let's get it done.
Amen, brother. All right, 2 more questions. Here is the next one.
Hi, thank you for having me on your program. Without hearing how the interview is going to go, I initially just have some knee-jerk questions that I think are very important in moving forward, because anybody who's worked in these facilities knows the reality of the child abuse that goes on, and I think a lot of these grown folks are in denial that it is child abuse for whatever reason of abuse they've experienced in their life. So at this point, all I'm curious about is, are they willing to become activists with the rest of us, exposing the reality of this multi-billion-dollar industry of child abuse, and never profit from it again? And number 2, are they willing to continuously hold owners and other employees of these facilities accountable for child abuse, regardless of the psychological manipulation that they are going to experience if they do so? Thank you.
I am.
Yeah. And do you know what you're up against?
Yeah, I know exactly what I'm against. I know that these corporations have lawyers on retainer. I know that they've been operating for a very long time. I know that they have contacts with corporate lobbyists. I know that they have real measurable power and that they've been around for a long time. I think I don't give a fuck. I don't care. I would rather be dead with Cornelius than live the rest of my life with give a fuck unless it happens to me. And I think that if more people would stop waiting until it happens to them, we would stop having these situations where it happens to people. Compassion, empathy, care, these are minimum requirements for what it means to care about your neighbor.
We need to reframe our social norms. The social norms in our Western American society do not put forth these same priorities. So when you look at Eastern collective community-based societies versus Western independent individualist societies, what we've got here is it's all about what I can get, what I need. It's a me, independence. How am I different from others? And somehow we've conspired to collaborate that with some totally perverse way in which we are no longer responsible for our own communities. And for me, I thought it was a duh that, the elderly, the young, the poor, the weak, the animals, that those of us who are not vulnerable, if you will, at that time, or, in general, it's our responsibility, it's our obligation. And you talk about this first world country we're allegedly in, this superpower. I don't understand how the foundation of our community isn't to take care of our community as if it's our family. And I'm pretty sure that that's the reason we're having so many issues.
Yeah, you're right. I think when corporations are considered people, profit is considered to be moral. I think you've said everything that needs to be said.
They all have been saying it. Yeah, well, this is what's so frustrating for you and me is we're not the first ones to say any of this. And at what point does anybody care? I mean, look, Congress already did all these investigations with the GAO. They've got reports out there about torture, abuse, and death in these programs. And even in the 70s, when the government funded these original programs, they reviewed them and found they had brainwashing tactics like the North Koreans. So, this is an open secret. How do we as a society combat an open secret?
I think we march.
I think so too.
And we fill the streets and we make them feel so fucking uncomfortable and scared that they have no choice but to give us justice.
Well, that's stage 2, baby. We're coming after sequels in Dallas where I am. So let's do this. Let's get on this.
Yeah, I'm there.
I know you are, brother. All right. So final feedback from the audience. Saved it to last because it was a very nice thing. We don't get nice things often, as you guys heard. These were, for the record, respect for handling some pretty tough questions and comments from the community. At least I'm the only one on this call with you, but I feel like as a survivor and representative of the community, I feel like you answered them very satisfactorily. And I think it's very rare for someone to be so open, vulnerable, and humble. And so I really do appreciate the way that you've, composed yourself and offered yourself up.
Thank you. That's really kind. I appreciate that. This is the minimum. This is the bare minimum.
Yeah, let's rock it as minimums. Let's get some minimum minions, you guys. This is just the level. All right.
Yeah.
So last feedback.
Thank you for everything that you guys are doing for Cornelius. I want justice for Cornelius. Everybody should be charged. They all should be doing some time. Justice for Cornelius.
Justice for Cornelius, indeed. Yes. Thank you so much for coming forward with your firsthand testimony, and especially with this evidence that you've got, because this just supports this concern about the corruption of the work culture and these power plays and these programs.
Yeah, justice for Cornelius.
What little bit we can get. All right. Do you have anything you wanted to add before we close this out?
I want people to hold their eyelids open to make sure that they don't stop paying attention to this. I mean, look how long the protesters in Hong Kong have been in the streets, and the attention span, the dedication, the motivation. We cannot let this go. we have to go as long as it takes to get the job done. And then after the job is done, we have to make sure that nothing reverts, that nothing goes back to the way that it was. We have to create a new structure. We've got to create a better system for these kids, because if we don't do right by the most vulnerable in our society, then the strongest among us don't deserve to be at the top.
Yeah. You can't build a pyramid on the backs of the rest of us anymore. We're kind of done with that shit. And as the late, great Malcolm X once said, if you can't take care of your house, if you can't clean your house, then you don't deserve to have one. So
Exactly.
The landlords are here. We're here to evict. You have been found fucking guilty.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Well, again, thank you. And this is the beginning of a very long road. So we're really glad to have you on it with us.
Thank you, Miranda. I'm really grateful that you guys are doing this work. I'm really glad that I'm just glad to help.
So there's that. What do you all think? Is involuntary manslaughter charges on 3 of the 10 individuals physically present enough? Is it appropriate for Lakeside and Sequel, who are both completely aware of the culture they've created and the activities of their subordinates, is it okay that they not be included on these charges? I don't know. It's really up to the court of public opinion until the courts in the United States of America decide they'd rather weigh in. Maybe they might want to start caring about kids in cages, but yeah, until then, it's up to you and me. So make sure that you call the prosecutor, Jeff Getting, Kalamazoo prosecutor, demand that charges be extended to all 10 individuals fired as a result of this specific incident, and that charges be extended to members, supervisors, management, board members of Lakeside and Sequel. And let's also remember, based on what we just learned, it doesn't really feel like this was a boopsie. It seems like there is a lot to say as far as escalating these involuntary manslaughter charges to the murder that they are. So you can contact Jeff Getting. His email is J as in Jeff, GETT @cal county.com, and his phone number is 269-383-8900. So make sure that you reach out to the prosecutor and make your demands heard. And also check out the petition, especially the one that's over 30,000 signatures now. That is Justice for Cornelius. There are 2 petitions, so make sure you're signing the one from the Coalition of Nonprofits. It calls for a national review of not only Sequel, but other for-profit programs like this. So obviously, we're totally down for that. We're totally down. So make sure that you sign that. Start talking to people. Cornelius Frederick needs to be held up as the sacrificial lamb they turned him into against his will. I've heard a couple people use the terminology martyr. Let's remember the difference, you guys. He didn't sign up for it. He had no choice. He had no voice. He was sacrificed. And we're done sacrificing our children to these false gods. All right? Justice for Cornelius. Until next time.